So, question for the audience. How many times have you ever told someone how to do something over and over again and they couldn't get it? Like it was like they didn't listen to you. But then you have somebody and they come and say the exact same thing as to how to do it, and then they get it the very first try. Anybody have that happen to them out there?
Yeah.
Does that not drive you absolutely crazy? When it's like, you see it, and you're so excited they did it, but you're like, word for word, I told you the exact same thing. And they're like, but you didn't say it this way. Or you didn't say it that way. And I think that it all boils down to sometimes it's a two-way communication street. Either they didn't like the tone that you were saying it with, or they just shut you down for one way or another. So the point of this is, right, communication is super key. Not just, this is going to be a message that kind of, I hope, challenges both sides of people, the receiver and the giver. Because it's important that when receiving communication, we have certain things, but then when we give the communication, that we're also making sure that we communicate appropriately. Jocko Willink, in his book Extreme Ownership, talks about Navy SEAL platoon commander. And he said that he couldn't figure out, there was a commander, he was very well respected. And he was well decorated, etc. But this particular platoon, they just weren't listening to the guy. And Jocko said, he's like, I tried not to judge him at first. I just went at it, and I just kind of observed. And he's like, this happened for months where nobody wanted to do anything this guy had to say. And then he said, at the end of the day, he finally realized what it was. He said, this guy just couldn't communicate. And it was on so many levels. He would just, rather than talk to these people, he would either just scream at them or indirectly give orders to somebody else. And so what ended up happening to this platoon commander, now to get to that point of platoon commander of Navy SEALs, of grown men, right, you've got to be well respected, you've got to be decorated. So for this to happen to this guy, he ended up getting moved on from his position. And it all boiled down to the fact that he simply couldn't communicate and connect with his subordinates. So that's what we want to talk about really today, is this idea of communication. Why is it so important? Why is it so important how we communicate? And why is it so important that we listen to what's being communicated to us? So, because the reality is, right, especially as Christians, as business owners, as grandparents, as parents, when we talk, a lot of times it's important stuff. But it's not going to matter what we say if no one's willing to listen to what we have to say. And I think a lot of that, as we go back to that first example, boils down to stylistically how things go, how we approach communication. So today I want to look at 3 different ways to communicate. I want to first look at, I think one of the more important ones, one of the things that my dad will be able to chuckle at, is how we respond when someone tells us something difficult, how to give advice, and what both parties can do to be successful in a conversation. And in the forefront, this seems like the most basic set of principles, but it's something that I think that we all lack. And what I got from this was going through the book of Proverbs. And at first I was reading it because I would read a chapter of the Bible a night. And I was like, oh, Proverbs, this will be short and sweet. But then I just found myself highlighting like every verse throughout Proverbs. So we're going to be kind of jumping through chapter 15. But there's a quote from, I'm going to butcher the name, Epictetus. He can sum it up pretty much in a nutshell about communication. He says, be silent for the most part, or if you speak, only say what is necessary and in a few words. Be silent for the most part, or if you speak, only say what is necessary in a few words. What's that quote look like? I think first and foremost, it looks like this. Someone's talking to you, answer gently. Answer gently. If someone's giving you some advice, they're coming to you and they're saying, we need to talk about this, answer them gently. Proverbs 15, verse 1 says, a gentle answer turns away wrath, but harsh words stir up anger. Think about that for a second. A gentle answer turns away wrath, but harsh words stir up anger. What does that look like? Someone comes to you and says, hey, Travis, we got to talk about this. And our first words are basically, screw you, I'm not going to hear this. Or we just start right off with screaming. Anybody in the room ever been there? Someone comes to you, and your immediate reaction is just to go, boom, 1,000 miles an hour right there, right away, right? And what happens? Nothing good comes of that because we're immediately to that point of like, we don't even want to hear what you have to say. We're just not going to listen to it. But if we just simply even take it in and we just say, thank you, appreciate it, okay, I'll think about it, then the conversation can be had. And whether or not you're actually listening is another story. But you're turning away the wrath of just immediately going to our defense mechanism, because nobody likes to be corrected. It's just human nature. None of us like to be corrected. So if someone comes to you, answer gently. Because the reality is, if they're coming to you, there's either a concern or a little bit of truth in what they have to say. So don't just get defensive and start screaming right away. Which leads into the second part. Don't say stupid stuff. Right? Someone comes to you, don't say stupid stuff. Proverbs 15:2. The tongue of wise adorns knowledge, but the mouth of a fool gushes folly. The tongue of the wise adorns knowledge, but the mouth of a fool gushes folly. So again, what's that look like? Pretty similar to the first point. But if someone comes to you, listen to what they're saying. Don't just come back and say, well, you're an idiot, and then start throwing accusations at them. Just listen to what they have to say. Don't say stupid things, because all that's going to do is just stir up more anger and more frustration. And again, if someone's coming to you, more than likely they're coming to you with, there's at least an ounce of truth with what they have to say. So don't just be that guy that immediately just spouts off of the mouth and just starts saying dumb stuff and dumb stuff and dumb stuff. Conor McGregor last night in the UFC fight, he said a lot of stupid stuff. A lot of stupid stuff throughout the fight. And then, even throughout the time. And it just made the other opponent more and more angry. And then guess what happened? Conor McGregor broke his ankle. So the moral of that story is, if you say stupid stuff, you're going to fall and break your ankle in half. So don't say stupid stuff. And it's just really, though, think about it, though. We need to take it in and listen. We need to understand that, again, I don't want to hear this right now, but I'm sure that there's an ounce of truth as to what's being said. Even an ounce of it. So don't just go right to this point of, screaming off of the mouth and just saying things that you shouldn't say right away. Just sit back and listen. Do the classic move I know someone very well does. Because you're taking it in. You may not want to hear what has to be said, but rather than, escalate the situation, you're just taking it in. Which leads to point 3, and I know all of these really tie together, but be open to hear. Proverbs 15:5 says, a fool spurns a parent's discipline, but whoever heeds correction shows prudence. Right? One of the biggest barriers to communication is that we just assume the intent of what someone is going to say, and it shapes the entire tone of the conversation. I want to say that again, because I think that's huge. One of the biggest barriers to communication, especially when we're taking in criticism, or just, it doesn't have to be criticism, it can be anything, is that we don't listen. We just assume the intent of what someone's going to say, and it shapes the entire tone of the conversation. So think about that for a second. What's that look like? Someone comes up to you, and they just say, hey man, we got to talk. And immediately, the barriers go up, and the anger strikes. I can speak firsthand and say that I've had that happen several times. Several times, where someone comes, and it's not even about anything bad, but immediately, I've assumed the tone of the conversation. I'm not even listening to what's going on. So when someone comes to you, don't just assume that they're going to come to tell you something bad. Don't just assume the whole conversation is going to be about how bad you suck. Listen to what they've got to say. Because a fool spurns a parent's discipline. Parents, co-workers, friends, insert whatever there. But whoever heeds correction shows prudence. Whoever heeds correction shows prudence. So someone comes to you, just listen. Okay? Don't worry about if Timmy's coming up to you, that everything that he's going to say is going to be negative, or fix this or fix that. Because there might be some words in there that come to you. Same thing for your wife, your children, whatever it is. Don't automatically assume the worst in the conversation. Hear out what they have to say first. So that's just a little bit on when we're listening to the conversation. This is going to dive a little bit deeper now to if we're giving the advice. What's that mean? I want to be very, very clear. When you give advice, even if you're right, it's not giving you a free pass just to scream at people. Giving advice doesn't mean you can just scream away, right? So that's point number 1. Don't scream. Proverbs 15:4 says, the soothing tongue is a tree of life, but a perverse tongue crushes the spirit. A soothing tongue is the tree of life, but a perverse tongue crushes the spirit. Sticking with my Jocko theme here, he said this in one of his books also. He said, if you have to yell, then something's wrong. I want you to think about that for a second. If you have to yell, something's wrong. It's deeper than just the issue that's right there, right? So we don't want to just scream, because if we're screaming right away, it means there's something bigger going on out there still, right? It means that deep down, if it's a coworker, if it's whatever, there's a respect issue there. There's a communication barrier that they might not have understood what you had to say, right? So we need to make sure that we're not just yelling, right? We can't just yell. What good comes out of it? As we talk with the little kids, do they get more out of saying, go clean your room, please? Or do they get more out of when you're screaming at them for everything? And actually, this one hit pretty deep, as most messages seem to when I kind of prepare them. This week, the kids have been kind of crazy, and Peyton's screaming in the car. And what's my first reaction to do? Scream right back at her. And what does Melanie say to me? Do you realize that you just told your daughter to stop yelling, and the first thing that you did was yell? Think about that. So don't scream, because it's setting the example that way. And if you're screaming, then you're doing something wrong to begin with. But the next thing, this is the important part, and it ties into the first thing here, is spread knowledge, but don't be a jerk about it. If you've got something to say to somebody, tell them in a way that's not like a condescending, like, well, I told you so, or you need to make sure that you're doing this. Spread knowledge, but don't be a jerk about it, right? I started jiu-jitsu about a month ago, and it's one of the most humbling sports that I've ever partaken in. And, part of it has been fantastic, because I was skeptical to ever go, because I'm like, man, I don't know anything about it. This is like, I'm going to go meet with different people. I mean, it's a pretty intimate sport to be doing as it is, right? When you wonder, like, you're brand new to this. And it could go one of two ways. You could roll with somebody, and they could be like, dude, you're a moron. What are you doing? You need to be doing this. And then you get discouraged because you're like, I've only done this class for 3 weeks. You're a black belt. Or it could go the way of like, hey, that was good, but if you just put your knee up here, that would get you so this move was stopped, right? Huge difference between saying that you're terrible at something and saying, hey man, that wasn't bad, but if you tried to do it this way, that'd be helpful. And then lo and behold, like the next move, it actually happened the other day where we learned something over and over again, and someone looked at me and she just goes, dude, we just did this. And it was, it hit a light bulb off. It was, oh yeah. And then I was able to do the sweep that I needed to do. But it's spreading knowledge without being a jerk about it, right? Because it's a huge difference. Someone's more willing to listen to you, again, if you're respectful. Just because you have something to say does not give you full permission to come in guns a-blazing, screaming like a maniac, or just belittling somebody. It doesn't happen. Parents, that doesn't give us permission to do that to our kids, just to go off and say that. It doesn't give that permission to go off on your husband or wife, or whatever the situation is. It doesn't give us permission, even if we know that we're right, to be a total jerk about everything. Because where's that conversation headed? Where's that attitude headed? Right? A perverse tongue crushes the spirit. So those are two quick little things for if you're giving the advice, if you're having the conversation. So here's a little bit of back and forth that I want to do for both parties. If you're giving the advice, if you're receiving the advice, don't be afraid to be corrected. Don't be afraid to be corrected. Proverbs 15:10 says, stern discipline awaits anyone who leaves the path. The one who hates correction will die. And 15:12 says, mockers resent correction, so they avoid the wise. So think about that for a second. If someone's coming to you and you want to give them advice, and then you give them a good piece of advice, but then they look at you and they say, yeah, but I think that's wrong, are they going to be more willing to listen to the advice that you have if you say, absolutely not, that's 100% correct? Or are they going to be more willing to listen to that advice if you say to them, oh, I didn't think about that. You might be right on that. Which way is that conversation going to go? Are they going to see it as a one-way conversation, or as a, hey, this person actually has some interest in heart, and take what they say? Is it going to go the same perspective as, if you say to somebody else on the other side of it, if someone's trying to correct you with something, if, for example, going back to something as simple as jiu-jitsu, if they came to me and they're like, dude, you're doing this wrong, I'm telling you if you do this, you'll be fine. What's going to happen if I continue just to not listen to them? They're not going to tell me, they're not going to give me any advice anymore, and I'm going to get tapped out every single time. The reality is that this life, everyone's got more experience of us in one avenue or another. Be it Papa with backhoes or cleaning pools or any other things that we've learned from Papa throughout the way, or Troy with being observant about little things, or Val with taking care of Mace or anything. Whatever it is, everyone offers another piece of advice. And if we're not willing to listen and to be corrected and to have that conversation, then we're losing out on a lot, right? Because Joey works on vehicles. I don't know a darn thing about vehicles. Joey comes to me and says, hey man, you need to do this, or this is going to happen. I'm like, no. I know exactly what I'm doing. It's doing this. He says to me till I'm blue in the face, I'm telling you right now, if you don't do this, this is going to happen. What good is it for me if I don't listen to him? My car's going to blow up. And why? Because I'm too stinking prideful to admit that someone else might be right about something. Pride is an evil, evil thing. Be willing to be corrected on both sides of the conversation. Don't just go in being a jerk with a one-way agenda. It's not going to get you anywhere. And we touched on this really on both of them, but make sure we're level-headed. Proverbs 15:18 says this, a hot-tempered person stirs up conflict, but the one who is patient calms a quarrel. And I look at that from the perspective of, if you're upset about something and you're getting ready, especially to go into a conversation, just take a few minutes and breathe, talk it over before you go in. How many of us have had conversations that we wish that we didn't have, and it's all because we went in guns a-blazing? It's all because Troy made me mad right there, and I said, we're going to settle this right now. And what good does that do? It involves a lot of swearing, a lot of high blood pressure, a lot of conversations with the parents, and a lot of awkward dinner moments, right? Whereas if you just say, I'm going to take 5 simple minutes. 5 minutes. Troy, I'm really upset right now. I need to calm down. Then we're going to talk about this. Huge, huge difference than going in guns a-blazing, screaming like a maniac. Because as we talked about earlier, someone starts screaming, what's the other person's reaction? They're either going to shut you down, they're going to tell you to get the heck out of here, or they're going to start screaming back. And if you're not level-headed, where does that conversation go? Is it even a conversation at all? Or is it just a point for you to get what you want to say out and then let everyone just scream, and you could care less that you just basically crushed that person's hopes and dreams for the day? Go into every conversation as the receiver, as the giver, level-headed, right? Because as Proverbs said again, a hot-tempered person stirs up conflict, but the one who is patient calms a quarrel. A hot-tempered person stirs up conflict, but the one who is patient calms a quarrel. And that really leads to the number 3 thing. Be patient in your response. Again, both parties. Don't just immediately get ready, because what that shows is if someone starts talking and you just cut them off, or you just say, yeah, but, right away, or I'm not done, or whatever that is, that just shows that, again, your mind has been made up. And what does that do? What does that solve when you just cut somebody off? It shows you have zero respect for them in one level. And then it shows that other person, again, like, this conversation's going nowhere. So be patient in response. Proverbs 15:28, the heart of the righteous weighs its answers, but the mouth of the wicked gushes evil. The heart of the righteous weighs its answers. Just think about that for 1 second. If we all, within our conversations, took a few seconds just to breathe and really think, if I say this, what am I going to accomplish? How many fights could we have avoided? How many times could we have not been grounded? How many family feuds could we have avoided if we just simply just took a minute, thought out our response, and listened to what that person had to say? But again, it goes back down to our pride thing. We want to be right all the time. We want to feel better. Why do we get into arguments? Because we're feeling bad. We want to make that other person feel worse than we feel right now. That's why we get into arguments that we get into. So if you're patient in response and we stop and think, and you might actually be able to hear why that person did what they did, and then your whole tone of your conversation can change one direction or another. But if we're just quick to scream and ready to go, we're not doing any good. And lastly, this is, I think, the biggest takeaway. The end game should be to learn and gain for both parties. Think about that. The point of a conversation should be to learn and to gain for both parties. Proverbs 15:32. Those who disregard discipline despise themselves, but the one who heeds correction gains understanding. The one who heeds correction gains understanding. What does that mean again? It means that we should both be willing to sit back and learn and say, what's going on here? And sometimes that's a gut check. It's saying, you know what? Troy, I asked you to do that 5 different times. You didn't do it. Could I do anything different? Why didn't you do that?
I didn't want to.
Why didn't you want to? It leads into conversation rather than just, because sometimes it led into another story. I've just been, again, reading a ton of different military books and stuff, and it led into another story of Jason Redmond, a decorated Navy SEAL. He told an Iraqi guy, you need to make sure that you go in and you do this. And the guy went in and did that, but then he stayed there because he didn't fully grasp what was there. And Jason Redmond was afraid to ask that other question, to say, do you fully understand that you need to make sure that you're doing this, right? We need to make sure that we are in the game of our conversation is to learn, why is that person upset? And then gain, as the receiver, a little bit more perspective of, even if we're not going to outwardly say it, just very simply like, okay, note to self, if this happens, I need to do a little bit better about that. And if we're not willing both ways to learn, listen, and kind of gain a new perspective, what are we doing? What am I doing? Right? So, that being said, I'm not saying you just have to be silent within a conversation to learn and gain. Have some protocols in place. Just say, what I'm hearing, Dad, is this. Right? Dad, I'm not really sure why you're telling me that I should be doing this because I thought I was already doing that. And then he's going to say, instead of just saying you're an idiot, he's going to say, well, actually, no, what you were doing was this. And I got upset because I thought you were ignoring me completely. That might not be the case, right? It might just be, going back to our initial story, a simple misunderstanding. A simple, because Joey talks to his kids so much, they just ignored that first piece of advice. But since Carrie's cool and brings them cups that they all brag about, they might listen to it a little bit better from what Carrie had to say. And maybe that conversation then with Joey, rather than just getting so upset, because how many people, again, get so upset? I told you 1,000 times, and then someone comes over, and the very first time you do it, instead of just immediately being angry, hey, Carrie, what'd you do that was different? I said the exact same thing, and they didn't listen. But you did it, and they did no problem. You just need to be willing to learn and to gain. And then that conversation with the kids is, I understand that you like it better when this happens, but I'm still your father, so I'm going to do better at this if you're willing to do better at that. Conversation is a two-way street. It's not a one-way thing. When we try to make it a one-way street, nothing good will ever come of that. Nothing good. Again, our goal as Christians, bring people to Jesus, right? We want to get people here. We want to spread the good news. We want to just be a better example for everybody. For non-believers, especially for our friends and family. But if we're not willing to listen to what they have to say, and if they come at us with something about Christianity that doesn't make sense to them, we can't just jump and get defensive right away. We need to say, tell me why you feel that way. Listen to what they have to say. Have that conversation with them rather than just get defensive and say, because I said so. We've all been kids once. How many times did that answer of because I said so? How many times did that ever really make us feel good? Ever? So, sometimes, with your kids, it is the final answer, but for most situations, there's more to it. Just be willing to really go through the advice of Proverbs, right? Because communication's a process. It's all about relationship building and good boundaries. And as we learned from that platoon commander in the initial story, he didn't want to build relationships. In the people's eyes, he could care less about his platoon. He just said, it's black and white, this needs to get done, it's not getting done, that's it, right? And he was essentially useless because he could not communicate. He could not communicate properly or listen to it, so he was effectively useless. And I'm here to say that this world needs us more than ever, so we cannot be useless. We cannot be useless. We need to take the conversations, two-way street, and start applying it to everything that we do. We've got a mission. And our ultimate mission is to go out into the world and make disciples. But our immediate mission is Mason and Braylee, Gia and Stella, Travis, Tyler, and Troy, Bryce and Peyton. Those are our immediate missions right there. And if we're not communicating appropriately that way, then we're going to fail on that front. So that's my only takeaway. It's very simple. Just work on communicating. Work on communicating, because again, one of the biggest barriers to communication is we don't listen and we just assume the intent. Right? Listen to what people have to say. Don't assume. Don't be a jerk. Be respectful in your conversations, and don't snap. And we might just get somewhere in life. So let's pray. Lord, thank you for this time together. Thank you for just the fellowship we're able to have, for the donuts, for the actually really nice temperatures today. I'm just really thankful, especially for just the beginning, just Braylee and Gia and Stella just praying and singing their hearts out, Lord. And really, that's what it's all about. It's, it makes it all worthwhile, Lord. And I just pray that we all just really understand that if we want our kids, our friends, our families to know the same Jesus that we know, that we need to make sure that we're communicating in ways that are appropriate and we're listening in ways that we should, God. That's just my challenge. Help us just to go out and just communicate appropriately, listen appropriately, and just take things in, God. In your name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
All right, y'all. Guess